All right, good evening, everybody. A little late night, but I wanted to touch on something here. Uh, as you see on the screen right there, Alec Murdaugh. If you don't know about Alec murders, this man has been accused of. Well, he pled guilty to all types of financial crimes, and he was found guilty in a trial of murdering his wife and his son, his youngest son. Okay, and you see there in court, he was found guilty and sentenced to a long time in prison. Well, the financial crimes, I guess there's no question about that because he pled guilty to most of that stuff, and but there was a lot of questions surrounding the trial of Alec Murdaugh, and I watched the entire trial, and I had a lot of questions, but again, I'm not a lawyer, and I know, as you can see there, he's flanked by two of the most powerful lawyers in the state, two of the most powerful defense attorneys in the state of South Carolina. But a lot of things started to bubble up, and I was saying that I make not even a joke, but I was like, hey, Alex is coming home. And I'm not saying that Alex is going to come home from prison. Alex is going to serve the rest of his life in prison. That's what's going to happen. There's no question about that. That's how that's going to, and he's going to serve that time just based on the financial crimes. We're not even talking about the murder, right? But he's trying to clear his name of this murder. And there's a YouTube page called Fitz News, which I think, there's a link in the description to this full video that we're going to review from Fitz News. And Fitz News, what they do is great outfit, but they deal with corruption in South Carolina, and and holding elected officials and politicians accountable. This is what Fitz News does. Great outfit. Again, there's a link in the description where you can go and watch the this video that we're getting ready to review. You can watch it in your on your own time. But in this right here, they get into some more details as to why you see on the bottom, Alec Murdaugh is going to receive a new trial in regards to the murder of his wife and son. And you can have whatever feelings you want to have about, hey, he did it, they don't need to have a new trial. Well, the thing that's beautiful about the legal system in the United States is that no matter what we think about you, how bad of a person we think you are, you still have the right to a fair trial. And but let's get into this right here, and then you guys can tell me what you think. Again, this is Fitz News. There's a link in the description to this video so you can watch it without my commentary. or without my commentary. So here we go.
Following our exclusive reporting on hidden text messages in the Alec Murdaugh appeal. Also, bad apples in law enforcement, including another arrested sheriff. Also, a story of redemption you won't want to miss. I'm Will Folks, the owner and founding editor of FITSnews.com. Welcome to another edition of your Week in Review. Let's dig in. So in our first segment this week, we have in studio, for a change, our inimitable, intrepid research director, Jen Wood, who has absolutely, once again, blown up the Murdaugh murders, crime, and corruption saga. Now, this was, to your credit, not an intentional detonation. You were not trying to start World War III with the Murdaugh lawyers and prosecutors here in the state of South Carolina. But Jen, your report earlier this month regarding hidden text messages in Alec Murdaugh's case back in the days surrounding the 2021 graphic murders of his wife and son, younger son, Paul Murdaugh, really set this story off and running again, all over social media, people talking about it, and certainly sparked a war of words between Alec Murdaugh's attorneys and prosecutors in the office of Alan Wilson. But I want to back up before we get into that back and forth that we saw unfold this week and discuss its potential implications on Murdaugh's bid for a new trial, which I think the odds of that are still through the roof. If you're on Predicted or one of these other markets, I would bet yes.
And that's where I was telling people, and I'm here local in the area around where these murders took place. And, people are kind of dismissive of it. Like, hey, man, that man's guilty. He did it. Da, 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 da. And that might be true. But in the court of law, you got to dot your I's and cross your T's. And in this case, that wasn't done. And this young lady right here is going to outline that very simply. Not a complicated plot here. It's just quite simple. The prosecution, in my opinion, messed up. They left the door open, but here we go.
I would bet yes. But Jen, let's talk about the genesis of this report, and let's address specifically what you did allege and what you didn't allege. How did this report come to be, the one about the hidden texts?
Right. So in June, the trial of Michael Colucci was scheduled to begin in Berkeley County.
And who is he?
He is accused of murdering his wife, Sarah Colucci, in 2015. That went to trial initially in, I believe, 2018, and there was a hung jury. Mm-hmm. So they were going to retry that case. But just before the trial was scheduled to begin. And
guys, shout out to Miss Jennifer Wood. You can look her up and find some of her work. It's important that these type of good journalists are here, doing the work and, just kind of staying neutral in the evidence and, just being there, just making sure that the system works as it's supposed to work. Listen as she lays this out.
The defense for Michael Colucci, who is led by Andy Savage down in the Low Country,
very prominent attorney,
filed a motion to dismiss the indictment based on prosecutorial misconduct, stating that the investigators had a conversation with Sarah Colucci's mother before trial, where she said in the weeks before her death, she had told her that she wanted to kill herself by hanging herself. Mm-hmm. And that information
is pretty relevant.
Right. Very relevant, because that is how she ended up dying, was hanging. So that information.
Or that's how it was made to look, allegedly, according to prosecutors.
Or if you believe prosecutors staged hanging. So that information, according to the defense, never got to them as part of the discovery process.
Was it prosecutorial misconduct or is it investigator misconduct? Because we had some testimony from the prosecutor in that case claiming she never saw it. Do you buy that?
Well, they brought both the lead SLED agent, David Owen, who is the same lead SLED agent in the Murdaugh investigation, along with Megan Birchstead from the Attorney General's office.
And these people are... in the case of Alec Murdaugh, you're talking somebody with money, with resources. So I mean, just think about it. They can do something like that to somebody with resources, with money. Uh, there's no limit to what they'll do to somebody that don't have money or the resources to fight them.
Who led the prosecution, the first prosecution of Sarah
Formerly of the
Colucci.
attorney
Yeah.
general. Right.
The judge ended up quashing the indictment, but he did say he found that there was no indication of prosecutorial misconduct. But he said if they were to bring this in front of a grand jury again, they need to give the grand jury all of this information.
Right. Let them have that before they make it.
Right. So David Owen was testifying about, and this is what kind of sparked something to my brain. He was testifying about how he provided information to the prosecution team. So as a lead investigator, he would, he conducts his investigation, and he said, in terms of text messages he gives to them, he gives them what he believes to be relevant to the case, to the investigation. And I thought to myself, that's really interesting because, as a prosecutor, if I were to be an attorney, I would want to see everything. I would want to determine if something was relevant or irrelevant.
And she's saying that the SLED agent, the same SLED agent that that was in charge of the investigation in the Murdaugh trial and this other trial that, had the hung jury and all, excuse me, and all that good stuff, that this officer says that he turns over what he deems to be relevant, not all of the information, which is not a good thing.
Same thing for a defense attorney. I'm not an attorney, so I'm not 100% sure how discovery works, other than you're supposed to provide the defense with everything. And it just kind of reminded me of a bunch of files that I had received following the guilty verdict and Murdaugh's guilty verdict. And I thought to myself, there were some interesting text in there in the days right before and right after the murder that never made it to that official timeline that the SLED agent, Peter Brodowski, presented to the jury during the trial. And, I could see why the prosecution wouldn't put it in there, because I don't think it really would help their case necessarily. But to me, if I looked at them and I thought, well, gosh, why wouldn't the defense kind of start throwing this in there? Because you could provide some reasonable doubt. So I just wanted to take a look at what was put in front of the jury and, why it wasn't used, and how information goes back and forth during a trial.
And I think what she's getting ready to say next is that she discovered that all of the information wasn't passed, which is a no-no.
It is the genesis of where that story came from.
And so as you're preparing that, your thinking is perhaps this was a strategic decision by the defense, because obviously you talked about this potential evidence, and let's be honest, who are we talking about here? We're talking about Curtis Eddie Smith.
Curtis Eddie Smith.
For the most part. I mean, there are a bunch of other messages here that are curious and need some explanation, but the key figure here is Curtis Eddie Smith, who was accused by Alec Murdaugh's attorneys in the weeks leading up to the big double homicide trial of actually being the killer in this case. And yet, despite being subpoenaed to testify, was never called by the state, nor was he ever called.
Again, this piece is by Fitz News, and there's a link in the description. You can go over there. I'll follow them. These guys cover some really interesting topics in South Carolina about corruption, and they do some really good research. So go over and follow Fitz News, give them a like, and all that other good stuff.
Called by the defense. But Jen, something happened after your story published. It quickly turned from a story about prosecutors controlling the narrative in front of a jury to potential, based on what defense attorney Dick Harpootlian told Fox News, potential withholding of what could have been exculpatory evidence. So Harpootlian goes on Fox News and blows this thing up, Jen.
Right. He said, if he had that evidence, it may have changed his decision to not call Curtis Eddie Smith. And he it was adamant he had not received this in the course of discovery.
And the attorney on the screen beside it's the attorney to the right. That's Dick Harpootlian, who they are referring to, and he is a big time lawyer here in the state of South Carolina. Also state senator, but yeah. And this is the person who Murdaugh's attorneys were alleging, in the beginning, who was the possible guy that did the murder. But this guy right here is an interesting figure, right here. The same guy that flashed up earlier, Eddie. What is his name? Eddie. They'll say it again, but let's go.
So I thought that was really interesting. And another reason looking at this information is so interesting to me is that as the odds of a new murder trial for Alex go up, that trial is going to look drastically different. I mean, it's going to be a whole, I mean, you're looking at a defense team that knows the prosecution's playbook.
Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, that means that Alec Murdaugh is going to be exonerated of those murders. Now, he's going to remain in prison, and they're going to explain to you why here later in this video. But yeah, this is going to be, this is big. This is because of who Alec Murdaugh, who he is, his family. And this is, the eyes of the world on the state with this, right? Because, let's be honest, the justice system in South Carolina does not have the most favorable reputation, but let's go.
So it's going to be very different. And, in looking at that stuff, I wanted to look at that in that lens as well. So, yeah, I mean, he, told Fox News he didn't have it. And I was like, ooh.
And Curtis Eddie Smith is not just a random acquaintance. It's important to point this out. This is a guy linked to drug activity, accused of drug activity, alleged to have conducted drug deals on the property where these murders took place, as someone who has been involved in what some would say appears to be potential money laundering activity, perhaps involving Alec Murdaugh, cashing tons of checks. I mean,
millions of dollars of checks.
This is not just a guy who's like a family friend who could have had some proximity, but let's talk a little bit about these messages. In one of them, he's asking for a check.
Right. He says, and this, I believe it was between June 3rd or June 6th. I don't remember the exact date. Maggie and Paul were murdered on June 7th. Can you get me a check? I need to give these boys some more.
Now, the day after the murder, again, we don't know whether Smith's phone was on or off the night of the murder. We heard rumors both directions, but the morning after or the day after, there's a message from him to Alec. Tell me what I've seen. Is it true? Tell me what I've heard. Is it true? That would indicate or seem to indicate
surprised.
Right.
But
then there was another message later, a little cryptic.
Meet me at the fishing hole. And there was clearly another individual. There's text going on between Alex, Eddie, and then there's another individual involved. And they were all going out to meet. What were they meeting for? Was Alex under surveillance at this time? There's so many questions. And I would think it just seemed, the timing seems odd, priority-wise.
Yeah, it's also important to remember this is a case where we still don't have murder weapons.
No.
Never found murder weapons in this case.
I guess the question is, do you think the prosecution would be that dealing with the type of lawyers, with the reputation of a Dick Harpootlian, do you think the prosecution would try some rookie move in trying not to, divulge all the evidence? Do you think they are that slow? Just asking. I mean, Again, this is with fitness. If you've been here this long and you still listening and you enjoying this content right here, please hit the like button so that we can bring some other people over to this content. Because again, this story story has legs. This story is going to pop back up, and there's going to be a lot of misunderstanding. People will be like, "Oh, how are they going to let him out of jail?" Alec Murdaugh is not getting out of jail. He's just trying to clear his name of the murder of his wife and son.
Despite purported exhaustive searches. So very interesting to hear these references. But let's talk a little bit about, Jen, what's happened in the aftermath of Attorney Harpootlian's revelations, because this thing blew up. And again, people were already very bullish on the possibility of Alec Murdaugh receiving a new trial. But this really, for a lot of people, sent it into the stratosphere.
All right. He said people were bullish on... And I'm one of those people who was very bullish on the fact that Alec Murdaugh would get a new trial. Okay, and so what I want to do right now, I'm gonna take these guys off the screen for a second, and I'm gonna add. I want to give some context to this, right? Because you heard, what did I just do? Okay, I'm fine. You heard the guy make reference to Dick Harpootlian's statement, and Dick Harpootlian is the lawyer, the lead attorney for Alec Murdaugh. And so let's listen to those statements that Dick Harpootlian made on Fox News that set the whole thing on fire. There's Dick Harpootlian right there online. Let's go.
One of the big decisions in any trial like this is who you call as witnesses. And if you remember, there was a guy named Eddie Smith, allegedly related to Alec, who is admitted, and the state asserts that he processed maybe millions of dollars of Oxycontin to Alec. Those texts, the ones we don't have, indicate a little more of the timeline of those distributions, and some of them are the week of the murder. And we were not aware of those. Had we been aware of those, it may have made a difference in our decision not to call Eddie Smith to the stand. I'd point out that Eddie Smith, based on what the Attorney General has said, is probably the largest distributor of Oxycontin in the history of the state. And he has not been prosecuted, wandering the streets, I heard maybe out of the state. And we're perplexed why Eddie Smith has been given this preferential treatment when once Alec was convicted, there was no reason not to go ahead and prosecute him. Everybody else has pled guilty. Everybody else that was indicted has pled guilty, except Eddie Smith. Now, these texts would have given us additional information, we believe, and I've talked to Jim Griffin, it might have made the difference in us calling him to the stand or not calling him to the stand. So yes, they're important. We have an appeal based on errors made by the judge during the trial, and of course, the attempt by, or maybe she did, the efforts by the clerk of court, Becky Smith, to fix the jury. And that's a huge issue. And many of the people we've had look at the appeal believe we have a substantial chance of getting a new trial.
Now, as of right now, this lady she was arrested here recently. This Becky Hill. She was doing a lot of weird things during the trial. Like, she was doing a lot of weird things. She was acting like a woman who had been in that position for 20 plus years, and kind of did what she want because she was never in the spotlight, and got in the spotlight in this, and it got a little too bright for her. And she did some things. And in this, where you see her, they're testifying now, this was the first, I think it was the first court appearance for Alec in his attempt for a retrial. And she perjured herself in this court proceeding right here. And then again, she's got some other things going on with some money. But yeah. Let's see if that's all Dick had to say.
Just based on the jury tampering. So So this would be an issue. If we get a new trial, it'd be an issue that would be relevant in how we prepare for that trial. If we don't get a new trial, then there's something called habeas or post-conviction relief. And if you find that police or prosecutors have hidden evidence that would have been made a difference, you can appeal on that basis. So, but the state's brief on the underlying appeal is due August 8th. We have up to 30 days to reply, and then the Supreme Court will decide whether to have argument, whether to grant it, whether to deny it, and that could take months. Well, if the Supreme Court rules in our favor, we'll get a new trial. And we're hopeful of that. And again, there are all kinds of debates about the evidence and how it was allowed in by the trial judge and whether it should have been excluded or allowed in. And those certainly are important. And we think there's several of them that individually would give us a new trial. But more important is a judge, a former Chief Justice, Supreme Court, had an evidentiary hearing on Becky Hill's conduct, in which she found A, Becky Hill was not credible, and B, that Becky Hill did attempt to influence jurors to convict Alec Murdaugh. She told several of her coworkers that she was writing a book, and if it would be better for book sales if Alec Murdaugh was convicted. So we think that, and there is no clear state precedent on whether that's enough, but there's a clear federal precedent that we should get a new trial. So again, I think we should hear something before the end of the year or early next year. Remember now, we had a 6-week trial. It was supposed to be a 3-week trial. And the reason it was 6 weeks was the judge allowed all this financial misconduct for 2.5 weeks, almost 3 weeks. That will not happen in a second trial because he's pled guilty to it. So those victims and whatever aren't going to be testifying. All that will be left is the forensic evidence and the facts. And the forensic evidence have submitted and believe will overwhelmingly prove that Alec Murdaugh did not kill Paul and Maggie.
And so, like he was saying, a lot of that trial got to be about things that he had already pled guilty about. Like, there was no question about whether or not Alec Murdaugh was a scumbag, and but that should not have played a part in his trial, and especially the things that Miss Becky Hill right here was involved in. That was and she's been arrested, based on her activities. So, okay, that was Alec's attorney. So let's finish right here. Again, this video right here is from Fitz News, FITTS. Go over there, give them a follow. They do a lot of great work for the people.
But I wanted to talk about some responses that we've received in the aftermath of Harpootlian's statements from the Office of Attorney General Alan Wilson. We reached out to them to find out what they thought of these claims that were made by Harpootlian, and the response we got was that they got everything. That every piece of information from the cell dumps of Alec Murdaugh's devices, plural, that's what they said, was turned over. Now, what was interesting about this is Kittle's statement further noted that the defense attorneys, according to him, received more information than the prosecutors did,
Right.
because according to him, there was a taint team established which reviewed all of Murdaugh's communications to make sure that there were no attorney-client materials that were inadvertently provided to prosecutors. And Jen, this is where I think it gets interesting, because this is a guy who had a ton of clients. He's a very prominent lawyer, the former head of the South Carolina Association for Justice, the Trial Lawyers Association. He's the former head of that organization. This guy's a huge lawyer down there. He's also an assistant solicitor down there. So he's got a ton of cases that he's involved in. But not only that, as the Murdaugh saga unfolded, we saw that there was just a broad spectrum of criminal investigations underway.
I'm sorry, I said two T's. There it is. You see it on the screen right now, right there. FITS News, independent, unapologetic. and I support them.
Into Murdaugh, and civil cases involving his alleged fleecing and cases involving his family members, including the late Paul Murdaugh. So there's a potential massive universe of potential attorney-client information. So we asked the Attorney General's office, what were your filters? What were you?
Right, because there were clear communications in the official timeline that were from clients. Him meeting a client at the office on June 7th in the morning and going back and forth. So why was that included, yet the Cousin Eddie stuff wasn't? It's just very bizarre.
Doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, we did ask the Attorney General's office to specify what they used for that taint review to filter all this information. We were told by Robert Kittle, basically nothing regarding that. They did not specify. He said all texts and information gathered from Alec Murdaugh's devices were timely provided to the defense prior to trial, and a record was kept of when discovery was provided.
I mean, when I was writing, it did cross my mind, what if they didn't have these? But quickly, I was like, there's no way. There's absolutely no way they would have withheld this. It just didn't. Yeah, it's not what I expected.
Mm-hmm. But we don't even know whether Curtis Eddie Smith's attorneys received all of this information.
Well, that's a good point, because he still has not yet gone to trial.
Years later, we still got Curtis.
4 years later.
4 years later, no charges filed against Curtis.
And that's interesting, because Curtis Eddie Smith, again, is a key figure in this. This is the guy that he did major drug deals, allegedly with Alec, millions of dollars worth of Oxycontin. And you got to understand the Hampton area down Hilton Head, and I know it's known as a beach resort, but these are big time drug trafficking lanes, where stuff can come in from South America, but whole nother story. But anyway, so yeah, this guy hasn't been tried yet. He's actually out.
Well, they're filed, or they're just pending.
Correct. Yeah.
There's been no adjudication, no trial, nothing.
So they're basically keeping him on ice.
Mm-hmm.
But he was let out of prison. He was detained during the trial. But a month or so after the trial, you remember we covered the hearing, he was released, and bond was reinstated by Judge Clifton Newman, who presided over that trial. Just a lot of weird developments in this case, Jen. And when you couple this with the jury tampering allegations, with the alleged jury rigging, in fact, as Myra Crosby, the juror who was unceremoniously removed from that panel for refusing to state a preference, according to her. There's a lot of things that don't add up here.
Right. And there's just so many questions hanging out there for me. There's just the loose ends. That's what I call it. I think I did an article, the loose ends. When are they going to get tied up? Spencer Roberts and Jerry Rivers, two individuals that were indicted and in connection with Alex Murdaugh and Cousin Eddie's whatever was going on down there. They ended up pleading, so we don't really know a lot about those cases, like what they were indicted for, what led up to those charges, what were the allegations. We don't know much.
Well, I think you just put your finger on it. Whatever was going on down there, because we did some reports back in September of 2021, again, a long time ago, that began to pull some of the strings into allegations of drug running, allegations of money laundering at a very large scale. Certainly, this is a part of the state where that behavior, not surprising to anyone.
Right,
I mean, cocaine built Hilton Head. I mean, come on. The drug smuggling, the gentleman smugglers. Jason Ryan, one of the guys who did a Murdaugh book, actually wrote a book about that smuggling operation. So this is a place that, those shipments and that money laundering structure certainly would be there. Was Murdaugh a part of that? Did he get too deep into it? Is that somehow something that led to what happened to his family members? Or was this a case exactly like the prosecution said, a guy who had been stealing a ton of money from his clients and had reached the end of the road and felt he had to do something drastic to deflect attention.
And, Dick Harpootlian has always said, they didn't, from day one, Alec Murdaugh was their suspect. They did not pursue any other avenues of investigation. And to me, these texts are really interesting because they kind of make that point. Did they pursue that? I don't know. I don't know. They could have tracked those people down and said, why were you meeting? What was, the purpose of the meeting? What were all these texts? What were these checks for?
And maybe they did.
Right. That could have happened. Very, very much so. And it got
maybe
nowhere.
Harpootlian is playing the press. I mean, the guy has been very good at that as it relates to this case. However, I think it's important to note the jury tampering allegations, when they dropped that bombshell, that was not a Dick Harpootlian smoke and mirrors operation. They brought the goods on the jury tampering. In fact, we think it may even be worse than that.
Right. And Becky Hill, I mean, she's now facing criminal charges, not for jury tampering.
Conveniently.
Right. But, it certainly further diminishes any credibility she would have had. So it is, I have a lot of questions about the integrity of what happened during that trial.
Absolutely. And again, as we've said so often, Jen, this was a case the state had to get right. So much attention, so much scrutiny.
Yeah, and that's the crux of it, man. The integrity of the trial wasn't solid, and that is grounds for a retrial.
International documentaries, an international audience. This was a case South Carolina's much maligned justice system had to get right, and clearly they didn't do it. Which is why we're probably going to be running this thing back.
Right.
Well, we had attorney.
So yeah, you can catch the rest of that over there on Fitz, FITS News. Go ahead and look them up, man. They do a lot of good work. You know what I mean? It's an interesting story right there about the former sheriff up there in the Greenville area. So, I don't know. I know if they rerun it, I'm gonna cover it. I'll be covering it a lot, close, because if it ends back up in court, this man's gonna on that charge, he's gonna be found not guilty, and he's gonna spend the rest of his life in jail because he pled guilty on federal charges that I know on the federal charges got like 40 years. So he's, him being cleared of his wife and son's murder won't bring him home, but people gonna react to it as if he's coming home, and it's just because they just gonna be reacting to something. Anyway, get in the comment section.